When Rad hit theaters in 1986, it didn't arrive as a prestige film or a studio backed blockbuster. It arrived loud, colorful, unapologetic, and absolutely convinced that BMX wasn't just a sport, it was a culture waiting to explode. And in a very real way, it did. Before Rad BMX and freestyle existed, but mostly on the margins, it lived in parking lots, dirt tracks, backyards, and small competitions that only insiders really followed. Riders knew each other, magazines covered it, kids built jumps out of plywood and cinder blocks. But outside of that world, BMX was still seen as a phase, a toy bike version of something more serious. Rad changed that perception overnight. The movie didn't explain BMX to the audience, it celebrated it. It assumed the viewer wanted in, not a lesson. From the opening scenes, bikes weren't props, they were the point. The camera didn't cut away from tricks, it lingered, it followed. It treated riding like performance and rebellion at the same time. That mattered. Hollywood had shown sports before, but usually as obstacles to overcome or metaphors for personal growth. Rad did something different. It made BMX the hero, not the backdrop, not the hobby. The bike itself was the star. And for kids watching in the 1980s, that was electric. The movie arrived at exactly the right cultural moment. Skateboarding had already carved out its own identity. MTV was shaping style, music, and attitude. Kids were hungry for something that felt fast, dangerous, and theirs. BMX fit perfectly into that space, and Rad gave it a cinematic face. The tricks mattered. Before Rad, many people had never seen freestyle riding up close. Flatland tricks, ramp riding, racing combined with style. The movie showcased real riders doing real moves, filmed in ways that made them look larger than life. These weren't actors pretending to ride, they were actual BMX legends performing at a level that was cutting edge for the time. Seeing that on a big screen changed expectations. Kids didn't just want to ride bikes anymore, they wanted to freestyle, they wanted pegs, gyros, pads, they wanted ramps in their driveways. Flatland became something kids practiced on sidewalks. Racing tracks saw an influx of riders who wanted to look as cool as they were fast. Rad blurred the line between racing and freestyle in a way that reshaped BMX culture. The Hell Track sequence became iconic for a reason. It wasn't realistic in a traditional sports sense, but it captured the fantasy of BMX. Speed, danger, style, and individuality all at once. It told kids that this wasn't about following rules, it was about expression. That idea stuck. After Rad, BMX wasn't just about competition results, it was about image, creativity, and personal style. Riders started thinking about how tricks looked, not just whether they landed. Freestyle exploded in popularity. Flatland contests grew. Ramp riding evolved. The bike itself became a canvas. The movie also changed how BMX was marketed. Companies realized that BMX wasn't just selling equipment, it was selling identity. Clothing brands, bike manufacturers, and magazines leaned into the lifestyle aspect harder than ever. Neon colors, bold graphics, and aggressive branding became part of the look. Rad didn't invent that, but it amplified it dramatically. And then there was the soundtrack. The music mattered just as much as the riding. Synth heavy, energetic, unapologetically 80s, the soundtrack made BMX feel like part of a larger youth movement. Riding wasn't quiet, it wasn't subtle, it was loud, fast, and meant to be seen. That connection between music and motion helped cement freestyle BMX as a cultural statement, not just a sport. Critically, Rad was dismissed when it came out. Reviews were harsh. It was called cheesy, unrealistic, and over the top. But critics missed the point. Rad wasn't made for critics. It was made for kids who rode bikes until the streetlights came on, kids who scraped knees, bent rims, and kept riding anyway, kids who didn't need realism, they needed permission to dream bigger, and that permission had consequences. After Rad BMX participation surged, local scenes grew, skate parks began accommodating bikes, freestyle competitions became more visible, the sport matured faster because more people were watching, practicing, and pushing boundaries. The movie also created a shared reference point. If you rode BMX in the late 80s or early 90s, everyone knew Rad. Lines were quoted, scenes were replayed on VHS until the tape wore thin. It became a cultural shorthand, a badge of belonging. Even writers who knew the movie, exaggerated reality, still felt its impact. It made BMX feel legitimate. It told kids that what they were doing mattered enough to be put on a screen. That psychological shift is hard to measure, but impossible to ignore. Years later, as BMX evolved into the X Games era and eventually into the Olympics, Rad gained new appreciation. Riders who grew up watching it became professionals. They credited it not for teaching them tricks, but for inspiring them to ride in the first place. In that way, Rad didn't change BMX by inventing something new. It changed BMX by amplifying what was already there. It took a subculture and projected it outward. It told the world that BMX was fast, creative, rebellious, and worth paying attention to. And it told kids that their bikes weren't toys, they were tools of expression. Today, Rad is remembered not because it was perfect, but because it was sincere. It believed in BMX completely. It didn't apologize, it didn't explain itself. And that belief changed everything. Freestyle BMX became more than tricks, it became identity, style, community. And while the sport has evolved far beyond what Rad showed, the spark it lit is still visible every time a rider chooses creativity over convention. That's how a movie that critics dismissed ended up reshaping an entire sport, not by being realistic, but by being fearless. And for BMX, that made all the difference.